Welcome into Fantasy Fix, our fantasy football podcast presented by MyBookie.ag. I'm your host, Rachel Holt. I'm joined by Darren Hartwell. And Darren, later on in the show, we actually get a special treat. Scott Pianowski of Yahoo Sports will be Skyping in with us, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But very exciting, a big draft weekend coming up for a lot of people.
These next 2 weeks, most exciting time of the year.
Okay,
fantasy draft
here we
season.
go.
Yep.
Drum roll, please. Okay, so let's first talk. Let's just get right into it.
I'm ready.
People want to know. We got to give the people what they want.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have much time to prepare. So let's talk about trends from last year that will help people out as they head into draft day this year.
Yeah, I think kind of the biggest trend, and this is kind of a league-wide trend and we've seen in the last few years, is the running backs really getting involved in the passing game, really catching passes. They're not just traditional running backs anymore. They're kind of dual running back wide receivers almost. Saw last year 5 of the top 6 scoring running backs all had 50 receptions or more, and Ezekiel Elliott was the only exception. He led the NFL in rushing yards, so he did it right for himself. David Johnson, the points leader last year, 879 receiving yards, which is essentially wide receiver production. So, you know, if you're in a PPR league, that's huge. You want to target a running back who's also going to be a threat in the passing game. You know, even if you're not in a PPR league, those receiving yards can really add up. And then later on down the line, without those top tier guys, you know, you have guys like Duke Johnson or Theo Riddick. You look at their rushing numbers; they might not be too great. But if you're in a PPR league, those can be really consistent guys for you, guys who consistently catch passes out of the backfield. It's kind of a high ceiling or high floor, I guess you could say. So those are guys, you know, you really want to pay attention to, guys who can be effective in the passing game.
Okay, other trends from 2016.
Yeah, the other big one we saw last year, we mentioned Elliott, is the rookies. The rookies stepping up. I mean, Elliott was the leading rusher, right, in the NFL as a rookie. His teammate Dak Prescott, he was the 6th highest scoring QB. So rookies getting involved. Jordan Howard of the Bears also kind of came out of nowhere, but you know, coaches aren't really afraid to play rookies, to throw them in there and see what they can do. You know, it's not like baseball; you have to wait like 10 years down the line for a prospect to reach the big leagues. They get right into it. You know, this year we could see that again. You get a lot of skill guys taken in the first round of the NFL, the actual draft. You know, Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey, running backs. You know, you have wide receivers like Corey Davis, even tight ends, O.J. Howard and David Njoku of the
That's a name
Browns.
for you.
I know, you have to work on that pronunciation. You know, these are all guys who could work into the rotation right away. So, you know, if you're seeing, you know, the little, you know, star for a rookie next to a guy's name, that doesn't necessarily mean you should wait. You know, these guys could contribute right away.
Okay, well, we'll talk about last year's favorite rookie, Ezekiel Elliott, later on in the show. Don't worry, we'll get to that.
Yes.
I'm sure many people watching this, one of the questions that they have right away is, in a mock draft, listen, who do I want first? Who do I want second?
Yep.
So let's go through the names of those top 10 guys that you should be eyeing and try to take depending on what position you're drafting.
Yeah, so this has kind of been a fluid situation, but right now, my top 10, I'll give you my top 10. I like David Johnson first, like Le'Veon Bell, and then Antonio Brown, the pair of Steelers.
So 2 running backs and a wide receiver.
Yep, yeah, 2 running backs. Elliott was my 3rd overall. I know we'll talk about that later, but then obviously the suspension changes that.
Right.
So Johnson and Bell at running back, and then Brown and Beckham, 3 and 4 there, and then Julio Jones, another wide receiver at 5. And then I'll go LaShawn McCoy, running back, Devonta Freeman, Jay Ajayi, and then rounding out the last 2 wide receivers, Mike Evans and A.J. Green.
It's funny, you talked about how fluid that situation can be. Of course, Monday night, Odell Beckham Jr. going down with an injury. It looked pretty
Very
bad.
scary.
I was thinking knee injury when I first saw it. Luckily, just a sprained ankle, but this could change by the day. So make sure you're keeping up with those preseason games and what's going on in training camp.
Absolutely, yeah. And I always like to wait until the last possible minute to draft. You really never know what could happen, especially with the Elliott suspension news that's still ongoing. So, but if you're drafting now, yeah, just keep an eye out and cross your fingers.
I personally know a lot of people are drafting this weekend. Of course, I like Labor Day weekend. I know you said you like to wait until the last weekend possible. That's my favorite weekend to draft. But hey, sometimes you gotta get together when people have their schedules.
You're just too excited. You want to draft right away.
A lot of people already drafted, so interesting to see what those people will do with Ezekiel Elliott moving forward.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about just the Patriots specifically, and more specifically, the running backs. Of course, last year, if you drafted LeGarrette Blount, you got very lucky. We didn't know this guy was going to be as productive as he ended up being heading into the season. Of course, he led the NFL in rushing touchdowns. So this year, let's talk about how their running backs are looking. Of course, they don't have Blount anymore.
Yeah, and so Blount's replacement is Mike Gillislee. He's kind of the guy who would figure to take his goal line carries. So in that sense, I guess you could say Gillislee is the most coveted Patriots running back, but just the track record with Patriots running backs and Bill Belichick, what Bill Belichick likes to do, he really doesn't care. If you asked him about fantasy football, he would not answer your question.
You would not be amused.
They have Gillislee, they have Rex Burkhead, and then they have Dion Lewis and James White. All those guys are going to see touches, whether it be in the running game or the passing game. I'm not taking any of those guys very high in my draft. I just don't trust Bill Belichick. They're a game plan team. They play whoever is best for the game plan and whoever is performing at that time. White and Lewis are like we talked about earlier. They're really involved in the passing game, but the fact that you have two of them there, the receptions out of the backfield are even going to be divvied up. So I don't think either one of those guys, unless someone gets hurt, either one of those guys is going to be a really consistent fantasy threat. Burkhead is an interesting target. Everyone saw he caught the touchdown pass in week 2 of the preseason, and everyone got all excited.
That was a leap.
Yep. And so he could factor in. He's a guy who can run between the tackles and catch. But again, you have Gillislee there too, and he's dealing with the hamstring injury, so there are a lot of balls in the air, a little bit too many balls in the air for my liking. I'm kind of staying away unless a guy like Gillislee or Burkhead falls a little bit. I'm not reaching for them. So
what's the earliest round that you would take a Patriots running back?
I would probably wait until the 7th round or so.
Okay.
Maybe in that middle tier of running backs, especially if Gillislee gets healthy, you could get some touchdowns out of him. He could be the go-to goal line back. So in that middle tier, sure, why not?
Darren, I actually agree with you. I know we have a lot of New England fans watching this podcast, but I have Patriots running backs every year, and every year I am left frustrated, confused, not knowing what to do as we head into each week. So
it doesn't make it
easy.
It's not
worth it.
Yeah.
It's not worth it if you ask me. No. Okay, so the most important part of this podcast, probably, best fantasy football names. Let's delve into this. You have to have a good name if you want to have a successful season. Everyone knows that.
Every year I find myself spending too much time focusing on what my team name is going to be and not my actual team. That's probably why I don't do well. But yeah, so a lot of strategies you can take for the team name to get the good team name. Everyone likes a good pun off of your player. So you draft a player and then just pick a player and make a pun. Couple examples I like: Golden Tate Warriors.
Okay.
If you want to be a dynasty, and you have Golden Tate, then there you go, a super team. Honey Funches of Oats for Devin Funchess on the Panthers. That's another good one. I know.
I don't know about that one,
Darren.
Yeah,
a lot of these are just floating around on the internet
too. That's the second one that we get? Oh gosh, what's the rest of the list looking like?
So actually, for the Game of Thrones fans out there, you can kind of be a little topical. You can go James White Walkers if you're a fan of the White Walkers there. My personal favorite, actually, I didn't come up with this, I just saw it, but A Girlie Has No Name. So it's from Todd Gurley.
A Girlie Has No Name?
Yeah, so like Arya Stark and A Girl Has No Name. It's a little bit of a deeper
Girl on
reference.
the Train? Is that what it's going on
for Todd Gurley, and then
that one just went right over my head. Do you like that? Okay, we'll move it on to the next one.
So it's there are a lot of levels to that. I just like the old-fashioned pun, but if you want to get topical with it, you can.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I don't mean to, to hate on those.
No, and we have a lot more on over on Nesson.com. So
Darren, you're the pun master at work. We should
Yeah.
have prefaced this beforehand. You come at us hard with the dad jokes every day, so
Yeah.
I don't even know if you're the best
Sometimes
person
a
to be
little too
giving
much.
us the
Yeah.
fantasy football names.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you have some stuff on Nesson.com. So what can we look for this year in terms of fantasy football news?
Yeah, we have we put together a nice robust draft kit this year again. We have some cheat sheets. We have the top 200 cheat sheet, positional rankings cheat sheets that you can print out, take to your draft. You also have positional rankings for each position and top 100 overall on that. And then you have your sleepers and your busts, guys to avoid in the first round, guys to take in the first round. Everything you could really want, including the team names. So, from top to bottom,
Got you covered.
hopefully, yeah.
Okay, and you can follow him on Twitter at Darren_Hartwell. Now we're hopping on with Scott Pianowski. We're very excited of Yahoo Sports, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Fantasy Fix, presented by MyBookie.ag. Now I'm joined by Scott Pianowski of Yahoo Sports. Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Rachel. Good to talk some football.
We can't help but notice that you're wearing a Patriots hat.
Yeah, it's a big thrill for me to be involved with Nesson. I grew up in New England in the 70s and 80s. I was probably one of the first Nesson subscribers. And even though I live in suburban Detroit now, I'm New England through and through. Still basking in the glow of the most recent championship. And even though we're talking fantasy football today, I mean, I'm sure a lot of the people out there know that the Patriots, I mean, they're loaded for bear this year. They could easily win 13 or 14 games, should be one of the best offenses in football. So I'm as excited about this Patriots season as I am about this fantasy season.
Well, we can't wait to dive into it all with you. Now we have to ask you, because we had a big discussion in the control room. You grew up in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. It's spelled like Chelmsford.
Yes, correct.
You're
Yeah.
in Massachusetts towns.
Yeah, you might know Chelmsford now. Jack Eichel, the young up-and-coming star for the Buffalo Sabres from North Chelmsford. When I was actually growing up, went to a high school hockey game against our rivals in Billerica, and I saw this guy score 5 goals against us, and I thought, this Clavine is pretty good. I didn't realize it was actually Tom Glavine, who went on to be a pitching star for the Atlanta Braves and a Hall of Famer. So the Merrimack Valley's been really good to me. For a long time, I was a columnist for the Lowell Sun, covering local sports. And again, I may live halfway across the country, but New England roots will always be with me. And it's been a pretty nice run for Nesson and for New England sports in the last 10 or 15 years. Seems like there's been a lot of parades.
Yes, well, of course, we're here. We're interested for your takes on this year's NFL season and this year's fantasy football draft. Now, this is a big weekend coming up for a lot of people. A lot of drafts are being held this weekend, so we want to make sure people have the most relevant and up-to-date information. First, let's talk general advice heading into a draft. Now, my advice, of course, would be to pay attention to the preseason. Of course, these aren't the most exciting games. We have the Patriots, your Patriots. They lost their first 2 preseason games, one to the Jags, so that pretty much tells you all you need to know about the preseason right there. But yesterday, on Monday night, we had Odell Beckham Jr. going down with what looked like a gruesome injury. Luckily, it just looks like it's going to be a sprained ankle. But you do have stuff like that going on that you need to pay attention to. So would you echo that same sentiment that you really need to look at these games and look at what's going on in practices around the league, listen to beat writers? That would be my main piece of advice.
Yeah, sure. There's definitely news to be gleaned, and you hit the first one. The first big one is, of course, who gets hurt. Hopefully Odell Beckham is fine, but if we find out something different in the next few days, it could address his draft stock. I mean, we've seen a suspension of Zeke Elliott, who would have been a top 3, top 4 pick in every league. Now he's more of a 2nd or 3rd round choice. So you're looking at player status. You're looking at, in a lot of cases, job battles. It looks like the Broncos have just chosen their quarterback with Trevor Siemian. Not a huge fantasy spillover to that, but it does have some relevance to deeper leagues that may use 2 quarterbacks. It affects the players around Siemian in that Denver offense. So we're looking for who's coming into playing time, who's coming into maybe a different role. How are players adjusting in new situations? Alshon Jeffrey goes to Philadelphia. How is he doing there? Baltimore has some new players. Danny Woodhead is there. They have some changes on the offensive line. You want to look at stuff like that. So I guess the case would be with the more veteran teams, and the Patriots, with most of their team a holdover from last year, there probably isn't that much to look at so much as nobody gets hurt. I mean, right now, probably the big injury with the Patriots for fantasy purposes is Mike Gillislee. A lot of people thought he might step into that LeGarrette Blount role. The 18 touchdowns, pretty juicy. Not that anybody's expecting 18, but maybe 10 to 12 looked pretty realistic. Now, Gillislee has been hurt for most of the summer. Rex Burkhead's had a nice camp. We know the Patriots are a little bit infamous for using a lot of running backs and being hard to decipher at times. But anyway, as far as the training camp goes, you don't want to make radical changes. And maybe if you thought David Johnson was the best fantasy player, if he's not hurt in the summer, you just kind of keep him where he is at number 1. Le'Veon Bell, but by the way, dealing with right now with a holdout, but it sounds like he's going to be ready to go in September. I'm not going to make major changes, but we do want to look at who's getting hurt. We do want to look at some of the role changes. And I will pay attention to, again, players on new teams. I talked about Rex Burkhead. How is he assimilating with the Patriots? How is Brandon Cooks assimilating with Tom Brady in that passing game? Those are the types of things that we're trying to scout in August as we get ready for fantasy football.
Many names and many players to pay attention to, certainly. Now, I want to ask you just general overview. You're heading into draft day. You're going to your buddy's house. Some of the people that you're playing against will just be more concerned about getting a 6-pack from the local grocery store, the local liquor store. But how important is it that you go into that day and you have a draft strategy before the first round begins?
Well, I definitely want you to have a strategy. The key is to have it in pencil. You want to be open-minded to different values, different unexpected things that may come into play. You may think, I'm going to take a tight end late in my draft, and then maybe in the 3rd round, Rob Gronkowski is still on the board. You may want to change that plan. In a lot of leagues, people won't take quarterbacks early, but if Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady were to slide to the 4th or 5th round, that might be too good to pass up. So I definitely want to have a plan. My plan this year would be to focus on running backs and receivers early. Although receiver is very deep, you can do well at almost any price point at receiver. But those are the 2 most important positions. You see really nice depth at tight end. There's unbelievable depth at quarterback. You can do well at almost any price point at quarterback. There's probably 16 or 17 that I would be fine with in a standard start 1 quarterback league. So my strategy is going to be the first few picks are probably going to be running backs and receivers in some order. But again, I'm going to be willing to audible on the fly. If Gronkowski slipped to the 3rd round, I don't think that'll happen in New England anywhere, but other parts of the country it may happen. I'd be open-minded to maybe taking a tight end early. If Brady or Rodgers were to slide later than we expected, I'd be willing to go away from my wait on quarterback strategy, which I've been doing in most of my drafts. So yes, have a plan. Make sure it's in pencil. Some people are going to do some odd things. Some people may be heavily driven on rookies. Some people may want to load up on a specific favorite team. Just make sure that you're ready to adjust to what you – it's kind of like if you were going to play in a poker game tonight, you may have an idea of how you're going to play. But then if you got down to the table and everybody was super aggressive or super passive or they played a certain style, you'd have to adjust on the fly. I mean, we see that every week in football, right? I mean, teams have game plans and then – as Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. I mean, hopefully nobody punches you in the mouth during your fantasy draft, but unexpected things will happen. Just be ready to change your plan as things unfold.
Now, is there a stat that you tend to focus on from the previous year? Of course, people are looking at yardage, they're looking at touchdowns, but say the amount of times that a player gets targeted, is there a stat like that you should really focus in on?
Yeah, usage is the key to fantasy. Everybody's talented, but a lot of times it's the usage that comes into play. So, I'll look at targets, for example, for receivers, as you mentioned. Sometimes yards per target will give you a good idea of the efficiency of a player. How often is a player used in the red zone? You look at someone like Amari Cooper, great young receiver for the Raiders. He has never caught a pass inside the 10-yard line in his career, which is astounding. Maybe you're better off waiting for Michael Crabtree in the same team and get him 2 or 3 rounds later in the draft. So the usage and some of the efficiency stats in the red zone are things that I will focus on. I don't always apply to the year because personnel will change. Or I'll try to figure out how is the player going to be used. And until the Raiders prove to me that they're going to commit to Amari Cooper as a red zone receiver, I can assume he's going to score 5 or 6 touchdowns rather than the 10 or 12 that we might like for him as a second-round fantasy pick. So the stats, the yardage, and the touchdowns, they're all important, but the usage stats, I think, often tell the story in fantasy that we need to be familiar with.
Okay, and Scott, you already mentioned that you're going to be focusing heavily on wide receivers and running backs in the early rounds. Now, what would you say to the people that are a little wary of drafting running backs? Obviously, they're the most injury prone out of all the players, and some people tend to stay away from them. They want to go for the wide receivers first. What's your advice?
Well, I would say at least for the first 3 or 4 rounds, have one running back you feel good about. Now, if you get the first or second pick, that shouldn't be difficult because you can get a David Johnson or a Le'Veon Bell. But I want one of my major 3 or 4 players to be a running back. It could be a Devonta Freeman or a Shady McCoy in the first round. I think Todd Gurley is back and playing the Rams. Now that Jeff Fisher's been fired, there's a new offense there. They brought in Sammy Watkins. They brought in Robert Woods. Jared Goff looks better in his second year. I think this is all going to be better for Gurley. He killed fantasy teams last year. I think he's a decent second-round pick. We have some interesting rookies. Christian McCaffrey in Carolina. I know it's an odd fit because Cam Newton generally hasn't thrown to his running backs, but I think Christian McCaffrey is a great third-round pick. Minnesota may be going to Dalvin Cook as their rookie running back. Offensive line isn't great there, but he's probably going to be their bell cow for most of the season. I would say, yes, running back is risky, and I know a lot of your players in the middle and late part of your draft are going to be running back lottery tickets. Maybe you try a Rex Burkhead and see what happens with him in New England. Maybe you try a Danny Woodhead in Baltimore. He'd be a great fit in PPR leagues. Maybe you take Tevin Coleman in Atlanta on the case that Freeman could get hurt, or that could be more of a timeshare. But you're going to want to have one running back that you start every week. I know that, again, these guys get hurt a lot. You're going to spend a lot of your waiver wire capital on running back. You're going to be trying to fortify this position. Even if you like your running backs, you're going to be picking them up during the year just because the position's so important. I just think you have to have at least one in your first 3 or 4 picks. I'm not saying it's going to be your first 3 picks. I'm not saying you have to only take running backs. But I would not want to go out of a draft after 3 or 4 rounds and not have the position touched at all, because then you really need to get lucky. So my advice would be, of your first, say, 3 picks, make sure at least one of them is a running back you think, okay, I can start this guy every week and feel pretty good about it, understanding that injury risk is applicable to anybody who plays football.
Okay, let's move on to quarterbacks here. Obviously, you have the top tier of quarterbacks, guys like Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady. Then you have other guys, Matt Ryan, Andrew Luck, any of those people, you'd be really happy if you got them on their team. Now, a good number of quarterbacks you could feel totally comfortable with this season. So in an ideal draft, obviously things change on draft day and you have to adjust, but in an ideal world, what round are you picking your quarterback?
Well, first of all, let me start with one quarterback I don't want, and a team I am running away from. Andrew Luck's not throwing right now. We're getting in the middle to late part of August. I'm very nervous about the Colts. Andrew Luck moved way down my board. T.Y. Hilton led the league in receiving yards last year. I'm not probably going to draft him. Frank Gore's 34, very old for a running back. I would just cross the Colts off your board. And you might think, well, somebody's going to get a great deal on Luck. That's fine. A quarterback in a fantasy football league is like a bus where if you miss one or a T, you're at the T stop and you miss the train, there's going to be another one in 5 minutes. So if you don't get Brady or Rodgers, you can take Breeze. You can take Russell Wilson. Matt Ryan's coming off an MVP season. Even though there'll be a little bit of regression there, I think he'll be really good. The Tennessee Titans look fantastic this year. Marcus Mariota is a great pick. Jameis Winston, are you watching that great series on HBO? This Tampa Bay offense looks fantastic. Deshaun Jackson changes the way people defend them. Kirk Cousins got some new things to play with Terrell Pryor, their new receiver. He should have a big year. Ben Roethlisberger's been a weird player. Home road splits are kind of a little bit jagged, but still, look at all the fun players he's got. Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell are 2 of the 3 best players in fantasy right now. So my advice would be, unless Brady or Rodgers go a round or 2 later than you think, and the value's just too good to pass up, I would wait. I would focus on maybe a Mariota, a Winston, a Cousins, a Dak Prescott. He'll be throwing a lot with Ezekiel Elliott on the sidelines for 6 weeks. Great connection with Dez Bryant in the preseason game last week. I think Prescott has a great season. And remember, he runs a lot, which is a great thing for our fantasy quarterback. It's hard to say what round because that will fluctuate a lot from league to league. But when maybe you get to around quarterback 6, quarterback 7, quarterback 8, I think it's a nice time to dive in where you're getting somebody with top 5 quarterback upside, but they're not going to cost you that much. And we're talking about a bunch of guys who could fit that bucket. You could even maybe go down to as low as a Phillip Rivers or a Matthew Stafford. Very deep position. I don't think it has to be your first priority. I hate to tell anybody on the Nesson podcast that you don't need to get Tom Brady, but there's so many good quarterbacks. My biggest takeaway really is not to take Andrew Luck. I just too nervous with what's going on with his shoulder right now. But I think if you get one of the top 10 quarterbacks, wait till about 4 or 5 go off the board, and then decide who you like in that second bucket. I think you'll do quite just fine there.
So it's the third round. I know you already mentioned it. A lot of New England fans are going to be itching if Tom Brady's still on the board. Is that too early to draft him?
I don't think it's too early to draft him, but the Patriot I'm getting the most in third rounds is Brandon Cooks. And some people may be nervous and say, well, geez, they have so many guys they can throw to. They have Gronkowski, they have Edelman. Malcolm Mitchell was a decent player last year. Chris Hogan is a decent player. And their running backs all catch the ball as well. But, they basically treated Cooks as their first-round pick. This has been a team. I think the last Patriot first-round receiver was Terry Glenn in the mid-'90s. They generally have not thrown draft capital at players, at skill players. But Cooks, nice young receiver for the Saints, 2 really good seasons there. He's by all indications I've heard, he's really clicking with Tom Brady in practice. I think Cooks is going to have an 1,100, 1,200 yard season, 7 to 9 touchdowns. Looks in play for me. He's one of my most common third round picks. Brady looks tempting, but we talked about how deep that position is. Now receiver is deep as well, but there is drop offs at maybe the top 2 or 3 tiers. I'd like, in an ideal draft, I think 2 of my first 3 picks would be receivers. So the Patriot I'm telling you to focus on, who's probably going to be there in the third round, would be Brandon Cooks.
Very interesting. Now, you just gave me an idea. Is there a team that you would mostly try to stay away from? I know a lot of people here in New England will stay away from the Jets, not only because they just don't like them, but because it's the smart thing to do. Their offense is not going to be good this year. About the Patriots, there's so many weapons there, and I know a lot of people have trouble if they have a wide receiver that does well one week, not necessarily the case moving forward. So just generally, teams that you're looking at, is there one that you would try to shy away from?
Yeah, we talked about the Colts earlier. They make me nervous. The Ravens' offensive line is in shambles right now. I think Joe Flacco is another quarterback who hasn't done much this summer. They have Jeremy Maclin, a new receiver. I wonder if it's going to take a while to get tempo going there. Buffalo, look what they've done. I mean, they got rid of Robert Woods. They got rid of Sammy Watkins. They're not sure if they like Tyrod Taylor or not. They bring in Anquan Bolden. He decides he doesn't want to play a new position. He retires. I mean, I think the AFC East right now is looking. I mean, the Patriots still set up to be a juggernaut for the next few years. I mean, it seems like all these teams are rebuilding. The Jets are basically tanking the season. That's a team, I will say this. I'm not taking any Jets on premium rounds. First 5, 6, 8, 10 rounds, the Jets don't exist in my world. There's a time where you have to consider they're still going to, score some points. I mean, maybe Bilal Powell looks like he may be their featured back. He could maybe be a 7th, 8th round pick. Robbie Anderson, probably their best receiver now that Quincy Noon was down for the season. I could take a Robbie Anderson as my 5th or 6th receiver as a flyer. They're not going to be primary picks for me, but maybe as depth plays. The big stay away team for me as far as a team that people like is the Colts. Luck, I don't want to touch. T.Y. Hilton is a wonderful player. He led the league in receiving yards last year, as we talked about. I would have liked him 2 months ago. I don't like him now. Jack Doyle was a breakout tight end for a lot of people. Again, if Luck's not on the field, I mean, the drop-off from Luck to Scott Tolzien is so dramatic. I mean, the Patriots are lucky. If Brady gets hurt, I think Garoppolo will at least be serviceable. Most teams don't have that luxury. I think the Colts are in trouble if Luck's not healthy. So if there's one of the quote-unquote good teams or the fantasy interesting teams that I would tell you not to pick from, the Colts far and away are my stay away.
Very interesting. So we talked about which teams to stay away from. Now let's talk about which players to stay away from, specifically star players from 2016. Now we already mentioned this guy, Ezekiel Elliott. He was suspended 6 games. So with the team bye, he would come back in week 8. He did file an appeal. That appeal will be heard on August 29th, but a lot of people will draft before then, and there's no real timetable on when we will hear about a suspension possibly being reduced, if at all. I mean, what do we do with this guy now?
Well, you hit on the key thing, which is he's out for 7 weeks, 6 games. There's a bye week in there. And in most fantasy seasons, the regular season is 13 games. So for 7 of your 13 regular season weeks, Ezekiel Elliott not only can't help you, remember, he also takes up a roster spot. So he's keeping you from picking up an interesting free agent, something on the waiver wire. He just kind of blocks your team. Most people, I think, would not take him in the first round. Some people maybe in the second round. I'm not considering him for the top 3 rounds, which means I won't get Ezekiel Elliott anywhere. And I'm fine with that because my goal in fantasy is to make. We've seen it in the NFL, right? The best team doesn't always win the Super Bowl. The key a lot of times is just getting in the tournament. One year the Ravens got lucky. One year the Giants. I mean, well, twice with the Patriots, but one year the Giants were outscored in the regular season. They made the playoffs and they won the Super Bowl. Your fantasy goal generally is to make the playoffs. You'd like to have a bye if you can, and then see what you can do. Because Ezekiel Elliott can't help you for 7 of your 13 playoff weeks. That's over 50% of the fantasy regular season. I do not want to spend a premium pick on him. I obviously, New England fans know this as much as anything. The NFL suspension rules and regulations and the way things can go in court. I mean, we don't know that maybe there's a chance Elliott could pass this off, could get a stay of execution, so to speak, and not have to serve the suspension this year. I guess there's a chance of that. I don't think that's going to happen, but we have to say that that's in play on some degree. But I'm not going to trust Elliott. I'm not going to take him in the top 3 rounds, which means he'll probably be gone in most of my leagues. Another running back I want to stay away from. And I know he's a fun player. I know he's a big name. Okay, Marshawn Lynch did not play football last year. More importantly, when he played in 2015, he was slow. He was injured. He's in his 30s now. I know Oakland has a good offensive line. It looks like a good system, but they have 2 young backs they're going to use also in Washington and Richard. I think Lynch, being a big name and being a fun story, I think he's going. If he were to go in the 4th or 5th round, I'd consider him. But he's going in the 2nd or 3rd round of drafts. For a running back over 30, we know how dangerous that can be. For a guy who didn't play last year, a guy who was ineffective 2 years ago, Marshawn Lynch basically may not be on my draft board. I just don't trust him. And a couple other guys I'm trying to stay away from. When you look at premium wide receivers, you really need them to be tied to a quarterback you trust. And last year, Hopkins in Houston, the quarterbacks let him down. He had a terrible season. Allen Robinson in Jacksonville, a breakout player 2 years ago, was terrible last year because of Blake Bortles. We talked about the importance of the preseason. He's been awful, maybe losing his job, more for the financial risk the team sees down the road than maybe how Bortles is playing right now. But then that would downshift in the Chad Henne, who may be worse than Bortles. I don't want DeAndre Hopkins in the 2nd or 3rd round. I don't want Allen Robinson in the 2nd or 3rd round. It sounds like the most simplest thing in the world. You want your fantasy receiver with a good quarterback. But people are going to take guys who have sketchy quarterbacks, and I don't want to deal with that. I'd rather go with a Doug Baldwin who's got Russell Wilson. I'd rather go with a Brandon Cooks who's got Brady. I'd rather go with a Michael Thomas who has Drew Brees. A.J. Green, with at least a quality Andy Dalton, not a great quarterback, but a serviceable enough one. Jordy Nelson with Aaron Rodgers. So when you're looking at some of these quarterbacks, receivers, if you don't trust the quarterback, and there's a point where it doesn't matter. It's the 8th round, it's the 10th round, it's the 12th round. You just have to take what you can get. But when I'm making my 2nd or 3rd or 4th pick, if I don't trust the quarterback tied to the receiver, I'm not taking the receiver.
Now, my last question for you would be top rookies that you're looking at for this year. Of course, there's a lot of big names out there. Leonard Fournette, Calvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey, who you already mentioned. Is there one in particular that you are most looking forward to drafting this year?
You're probably McCaffrey. I might have said Fournette a month ago, but he's been hurt most of this preseason. And with Bortles kind of submarine that offense, running back and quarterback isn't as tied as we talked about not wanting to take receivers with bad quarterbacks, but it's still part of the equation. So I'm a little bit spooked on Fournette right now, excited about what McCaffrey can do. I know he's not going to touch the ball 20-plus times, and that's a little bit – some people may say, I don't want to draft this guy. He's not going to be a bell cow. I mean, Jonathan Stewart's still there. We know Cam Newton will run in a few touchdowns. But I think McCaffrey can be one of those players who doesn't need that many touches to make an impact. So he's going to be in a lot of my teams. And Cook, man, he's looked fantastic this summer. And Minnesota's offensive line was not very good last year, but at least it's made some incremental upgrades. And Sam Bradford might be better than people think. He did set a completion percentage record last year. Remember, Minnesota changed coordinators in the middle of the year, so there's been some turnover there. I think this is a better team than people realize. And a lot of times we want our fantasy running backs in winning situations. I think Minnesota could be a 9-7, a 10-6 team. Think of how Miami was last year, where people didn't think they were that good. They ended up being a playoff team. The Vikings remind me a lot of that type of team. I think Cook is going to be a guy who's on a lot of fantasy playoff teams and maybe even fantasy championship teams in 2017.
Scott, this is all really great advice. Of course, we already mentioned that you can find him on Yahoo Sports, and you do a number of different fantasy sports, but this is the one we're focusing on, fantasy football. And I feel like people are going to be very prepared for their drafts now, so they have you to thank for that. And we can find you on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski.
That's right, just like it sounds, PIANOWSKI. And the work I do for Yahoo is on the Roto Arcade blog. I've ranked all the running backs and receivers in the last couple of weeks. I give dollar amounts if you're in an auction league. You can see the tiers of where the players cluster in talent, why I like some players, why I don't like some other players. And if you want to have a conversation with me, I'm on Twitter every day. Love to talk. You want to talk football, you want to talk baseball, you want to talk New England sports. I'm there, I don't know, 17 or 18 hours a day. So you have a good chance of getting me if you go on Twitter. And thanks a lot for having me. Always fun to talk to people in New England. I think the Patriots have no shocker here. I think they're going to have a great fantasy season. I don't think there's anything wrong with. I know you want to have the best team you can. You don't want to draft with your heart. You want to draft with your head. But in most of my drafts, I'm trying to come away with at least one share of this Patriot offense. And we want the players of the best offenses, right? And it's going to be the Packers and the Saints and the Steelers. But, New England's offense, this could be the best offense we've seen in New England since maybe 2007. I think you'd like to have a piece of it somewhere.
You're calling it right now. Well, we appreciate it. We'll follow you on Twitter. And thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Rachel.